Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. As the Iran deal becomes a reality, Washington's neoconservatives and their allies are bristling. A sanctioned and isolated Iran had long been one of their policy pillars. This is no longer the case. The neocon agenda has experienced a major setback. Is this a temporary reversal or a stunning defeat? To CrossTalk Neoconservatives, I'm joined by my guest, Brian Becker in Washington. He is the national coordinator for the Answer Coalition. Also in Washington, we have Fred Fleitz. He is a senior fellow with the Center for Security Policy and also a former CIA analyst. And in Charlottesville, we cross to David Swanson. He is the director of worldbeyondwar.org. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Brian, if I can go to you first here. What accounts for the staying power of the group of people that we collectively call the neocons? I mean, a catastrophic result with Iraq, a catastrophic result with Libya. Syria is being played out the same way. Ukraine is a mess here, and these people still stay. What accounts for them staying in their positions of power and influence in American foreign policy?
Well, in spite of the debacle of the neocon policy with the invasion and occupation of Iraq, which of course ruined Iraq and killed perhaps 1 million Iraqis, made 5 million into refugees, but also broke the country apart as a unitary entity, and then the spillover of their policies in Libya, the destruction of another independent nationalist and secular government, leading to the rise of al-Qaeda or ISIS-type forces in Libya, and the same policy in Syria, and then, of course, the debacle in Ukraine. In spite of these apparent catastrophes for U.S. foreign policy and, of course, for the people who are in the targeted countries, the neocons still have the dominant voice. And, in fact, you see, even though Obama has adopted, in essence, a program that any former U.S. president who was against Iran and wanted to take Iran's nuclear arms capability away, in spite of the fact that President Obama has, in this instance, secured an agreement with Iran, the neoconservatives are at war, as if something terrible has just happened to the United States. I mean, you have these politicians like Scott Walker saying his first day in office, if elected, will be to terminate this deal and maybe prepare for military action, when, you know, a third of the people in Wisconsin are living in poverty. That's not what they're thinking about. The people in the United States are not thinking about it, but the political establishment is dominated by the neocon ideology, which, of course, is backed by the military-industrial complex and backed by big oil, and that's the material basis for it.
Okay, Fred, weigh in there. What accounts for these people, their staying power and their places of influence? I mean, I think of people like Victoria Nuland. What accounts for that?
Well, Peter, I think we should be debating today whether this terrible Iran deal will lead to a restoration of the neocons and conservative foreign policy experts in the United States. I see this as a terrible agreement which is going to undermine U.S. national security, since Iran's nuclear program, actually, the timeline to a nuclear weapon will actually be shortened. This deal will lift sanctions on terrorists. This sanction will lift an embargo on conventional arms and ballistic missiles.
Okay, fine. We've heard this all before, okay? But it's really quite interesting. I mean, the other point of view, and that's what this program is about and why I do it 3 times a week, is that one could make the claim that Iran gave up something that it never wanted in the first place, okay? A nuclear weapons program, because there was no evidence of it. Mossad agreed with that. The CIA did. Many other intelligence estimates. And still we hear this here. Okay, I know the neocons are broken by this agreement, but the agreement actually is in American foreign policy interest. That's why, and I have never agreed with Barack Obama on foreign policy, but on this one single instance, I do. So what accounts for these people having so much influence, and why did they fail? Why did they fail with this president? That's a better question. Go ahead, Fred.
Look, the Mossad and CIA did not say Iran is not pursuing nuclear weapons. I think the evidence is very clear. Iran was and continues to pursue nuclear weapons.
Answer my question. Come on, please. No. I want to talk about the neocons in Washington.
Can I have equal time?
Yeah, but let's talk about the neocons in Washington.
The neocons in Washington.
Not only the Iran deal. We can do that for the next 60 days. Go ahead. What accounts for Barack Obama breaking away? Let's turn it upside down. Away from the neocons and getting away with this deal with Iran. Go ahead.
Look, the foreign policy in the United States is dominated by the liberal foreign policy establishment. The neocons, I think, have been struggling in the aftermath of the Iraq War. What they're doing now is they are working. There is a large bipartisan coalition against this Iran deal. The neocons are simply part of this. And I think the question is, will this terrible deal lead to a restoration of the neocons and the election of a Republican president? I think the chances of that are very high.
All right, David, you know, the resurrection of the neocons, the way I look at it, we can't shake these people, okay? Not the resurrection of. Go ahead.
Well, the American public is overwhelmingly in favor of this deal in the polls. That could be changed by these mega deca-billionaire lobbyist groups and the funding of election campaigns and the propaganda that's going to spew forth. But this, you know, and this is a very imperfect deal, and it only goes halfway, and the opponents of the neocons being only sort of halfway opponents is part of the answer to your first question. But this is an incredible, wonderful precedent because it shows that you can use diplomacy instead of war. And this is what they wanted, war. And it puts them in this ridiculous position of having to say, well, actually, we wanted a better deal, but we can't explain exactly what sort of a better deal because they don't want to say we wanted war. But if your re-election campaigns over and over again are funded by war profiteers and Israel right or wrongers, then this is horrible for you. And you have to come out and say it's horrible, even if you don't know why, because this defies Israel. And this sets a precedent that if you can use diplomacy in a case like this, why can't you use it with China about those islands and with Russia about Ukraine? And why can't you use it with ISIS and Syria and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Somalia and on and on? This is a wonderful precedent, however imperfectly its architects meant it.
Let's try diplomacy. Let's try diplomacy with ISIS. Do you think diplomacy will work with ISIS?
Okay,
That's ridiculous.
Let's go to Fred. Okay,
Yeah.
Fred. It was ridiculous that with the invasion of Iraq in 2003,
what are we talking about?
That's where we get ISIS, because of the illegal invasion and occupation of Iraq. That's where ISIS comes from. Yes or no?
No, that's not where ISIS came from. ISIS resulted because of the president's decision to remove all American troops from Iraq. He left a power vacuum in Iraq, which led to a terrible situation where the Shiite government persecuted Sunnis and allowed al-Qaeda in Iraq to come back. It has nothing to do with Bush policy.
Okay, nothing to do with the failed policy there. Okay, go ahead, Brian, and weigh in. It's remarkable here. The American foreign policy debate has no context, has no memory, has no facts, has no chronology. Go ahead, Brian.
And no accountability. I mean, Iraq was a country at peace with the United States, did not have weapons of mass destruction, was not threatening the United States. The United States carried out an act of aggression. It's an illegal act. It's an illegal invasion and occupation and destruction of a country. But more than that, it also destroyed a unitary, secular government. And by virtue of the occupation tactic, when they couldn't defeat the armed resistance in Iraq and began funding Sunni militias and Shiite militias and Kurdish militias to fight each other as part of a divide and conquer strategy, that broke Iraq apart. If Iraq had not been broken apart, if Syria had not been broken apart, if Libya had not been broken apart, there would be no space for the so-called Islamic State, ISIS or ISIL, and there wasn't ISIS or ISIL before that. I want to talk about the Iran agreement, though, Peter, if I could for a second.
Go ahead.
What Iran did was agreed to reduce enriched centrifuge production from 19,000 to 6,000. It agreed in writing as part of an international covenant that under no circumstances would it seek or acquire or develop nuclear weapons. The United States, on the other hand, has 8,500 operational nuclear weapons. Israel, which is facing and threatening military action against Iran, has hundreds of nuclear weapons and does not belong to the NPT, does not allow IAEA inspectors in. And what Iran got in this deal was the lifting of cruel criminal economic sanctions that were designed to harm the Iranian people themselves, which are not effective in terms of destroying Iran's nuclear energy program, but are successful in imposing economic suffering. And Iran got the right, which is a legal right, acknowledged now by the P5+1, that it has the right to a civilian nuclear energy program, which, by the way, the United States encouraged when the Shah of Iran was in Iran under their, as a proxy for the U.S. Iran had 26 nuclear reactors. as long as it was the Shah, as long as it was the monarchy, as long as it was the dictator who was loyal to the United States, then nuclear energy and nuclear production was fine. So Iran has achieved something. It has not been overthrown by those who use the nuclear issue as a pretext to carry out regime change. And that's what's frustrating Israel. That's what's frustrating the neoconservatives. Okay. What they're really afraid is an outbreak of peace between the United States and Iran, because Israel will be less important then as an extension of American military power in this region.
Okay,
that's the real issue.
Okay, Fred, no, let's be fair. Fred, go ahead, jump in, weigh in. Please do.
You know, Israel's not the problem here. Does Israel have nuclear weapons? No one knows. But if it does have nuclear weapons,
yes, we do. Yes, we do know. Yes, we do know.
That wants to wipe. Well, I'm not going to get into that. Iran wants to wipe Israel off the map.
No,
it's a state sponsor of terror.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
It has forfeited.
No, it doesn't.
Well, look, it has forfeited its right to peaceful nuclear technology as long as it continues to be a state sponsor of terror that wants to wipe the state of Israel off the map.
Fred, the United States doesn't export terror all through the Middle East on a daily basis? Droning people to death.
What an outrageous thing to say. Of course it doesn't.
The United States doesn't sponsor terror. Come on. Saying one side is all evil, one side is all good. No, it's exporting terror. Okay, what countries are exporting terror? Saudi Arabia is exporting terror. That country's exporting terror. I know it's not polite to say, but it's true. You know, don't blame Iran for all of the region's problems.
Iran is backing Hezbollah
10% of what Saudi Arabia spends on military. I mean, it's minute. Go ahead, Fred. Finish up before we go to the break. Go ahead.
Saudi Arabia is not exporting terror. Iran is backing Hezbollah and Hamas. The State Department said that Iran is still the leading state sponsor of terror in its 2014 report on worldwide terrorism. All
right, we're going to go to a break here, guys. And we're going to, after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the Neocon. Stay with RT. Okay, David, I'd like to go back to you in Charlottesville. I said in the introduction of the program that the neocons are bristling right now, their allies as well. And they're bristling because they didn't get one of two things or both. They didn't get a war with Iran, and they didn't get regime change. And that's why they're really angry with this president here, because that's what their ultimate goals were. It has never, ever been about a real or imagined nuclear arms production in Iran program. It's never been that. It's always been about regime change and war.
Oh, the CIA gave Iran phony nuke plans as part of trying to set it up, frame it as has been the operation for decades, at these false accusations of nuclear weapons in the hands of Iran. But this is something that's been going on for many years, and that this push back against a war in Iran has been successful time and again at high points in 2007 and again now, and it blows away all the arguments that war is a necessary, urgent need, because if you can delay it year after year, if the negotiations had just continued forever without reaching a deal, it's better than a war. And so you have all these war advocates coming out without any strong arguments anymore, and they try to go back to, well, you can't talk to the Iranians, or you can't talk to ISIS, therefore you must not talk to anyone else in the world. And so the fact that people sat down and talked with Iran takes it out of that category of demon with which thou shalt not speak. And if you can start speaking with Iran, why can't you start speaking with other countries, including the countries surrounding ISIS, the countries involved in the conflict with ISIS, including Iran, which, by the way, the United States wants on its side against ISIS, which is one of the shortcomings of this deal, as is the new weapons for Israel, as is the non-compliance with the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the UN Charter by the United States and its allies. So there is a long way to go, but this is a huge step forward in terms of eliminating the sort of bogus propaganda, including that mistranslation of one statement by Ahmadinejad that Iran wants to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, which is absolute nonsense. And so this is wonderful for anti-war communications.
Okay, Brian, one of the reasons why the neocons are so against this deal is because the relative power balance of Riyadh and Tel Aviv in the Middle East changes. Because the United States, if they can have a deal on this with Iran, who knows where they can go next? I mean, Iran now wants to get into the WTO. It wants to have a preferential trade agreement with the European Union. Oh, my goodness, this is like a normal country somehow. You know, this is going to change the dynamic in the Middle East. And this is what terrifies Riyadh and Tel Aviv, because they're the two bullies in the neighborhood, and that's going to change.
And it's important to look at what their interests are and what their congruent interests or conjunctural interests are with the United States. In the case of Tel Aviv, the United States cemented an alliance with Israel unlike with any other country starting in 1967, when the U.S. was bogged down in Southeast Asia, couldn't police the Middle East, saw the Israeli military dominance in the June 1967 Mideast War when they carried out the attack against their neighbors. And from then on, the United States has cemented this unshakable alliance with Israel. But if there is a new relationship with Iran, if there is the outbreak of peace, if there is a reduction of tension, if there is a way of having even a semi-partnership with Iran on some issues, then Israel, as an extension of American military power, this privileged, precious relationship it's had since 1967, and which did not exist, if you remember, in 1956 during the Suez Crisis, when the U.S. attacked Israel and criticized it, that relationship will alter. And that's what Netanyahu and that's what the Israeli ruling government really fears, because if the relationship with the United States starts to sever, if it starts to atrophy, if it starts to go away, then big parts of the Israeli population, those who are less racist, more secular, will become completely disillusioned with the Israeli settler project, and they could go home. They could go to Europe or Brooklyn or someplace else. In other words, there's a fragility in Israel which is papered over by its constant pronouncements of omnipotence, and I think that's really what they fear, the outbreak of peace with Iran. In the case of the Riyadh government, the Saudi government will realize that they too, like the Shah of Iran, can be overthrown, not because Iran is exporting revolution, but if there's a reduction of tension, a lessening of military presence of the United States, people might take matters into their own hands. And I think that's what the Saudi monarchy and the other Gulf monarchies really fear.
Okay, Fred, do you want to weigh in there? There was a lot said there.
Well, I mean, I'm a conservative foreign policy expert. I don't want war with Iran. I want a good nuclear deal with Iran. And my organization, the Center for Security Policy, put out a 9-point plan on what would be in a good deal. No enrichment, no plutonium-producing reactor. Iran has to significantly cut back its ballistic missile and sign treaties on ballistic missile proliferation. But I got to tell you that Israel is not the issue here. The Israelis and the Saudis are fearful of this because it's going to lead every state in the region to start enriching uranium. And I think it's going to lead some states, maybe the Saudis, to acquire their own nuclear weapons. Both states are very confident that if there's a Republican president elected next year, this agreement will be thrown out on the first day in office of that new president. It's so awful. There's growing bipartisan opposition, and I'm confident that this will become a campaign issue.
Let's just talk about what will happen if that happens.
It could lead to the restoration of neocons.
Okay, Brian, real quick, go ahead.
We have to start over with a...
Yeah, just to start over real quick. If the United States, either because Congress overturns Obama's veto or a Republican comes in and terminates it, the whole world will know. That means all the European countries, Russia, China, everyone will know that the reason this deal was broken was because of the United States neocon influence and intransigence. Then the sanctions on Iran won't exist anyway, because those countries holding the United States responsible will begin trade with Iran. So the United States is in a position where if it breaks this agreement, the only real loser will be the influence of the U.S. empire in the Middle East and elsewhere.
Okay, David, you want to weigh in there?
Not only that, but the missile defense nonsense in Europe put there on the excuse that Iran was a threat to Europe. That has to go away now, or the aggression towards Russia becomes too apparent to everyone. The nuclear energy that Fred mentioned that's being spread willingly and happily to other nations in the region of Iran it shows up the hypocrisy. There is a problem with spreading nuclear energy and so-called peaceful nukes and so forth that this deal does not address, and it's a problem in the United States and other nations around the world. But the idea that Iran is creating an arms race and that the U.S. most of the weapons in the Middle East are U.S. weapons. The idea that the violence inflicted in the past decade on that region by the United States and U.S. weapons gifts and weapons sales are not spurring that arms race is to read this situation blindly. And there has been a regime change in Iran. Iran elected a different president, which caused the propaganda for war to have to throw out 3/4 of its material, which was another wonderful step in this long process of opposing a push for war that should be a lesson to us in 8 other cases.
Okay, Fred, what do you think about that? Because, I looked at, I didn't see specifically your program from your organization for these talks here. But, when I look at the neocon agenda, it said any deal is a bad deal by definition, okay? They just don't want to engage. They don't want an agreement. They want to have limited options, and they want a fait accompli. That's why, it's amazing, John Kerry, for all of his failings, and they're endless in my mind, right in the middle of that, or right before the end of the talks, he said, but, everything is on the table. Force is still on the table. I mean, here's a man negotiating with the Iranians, and he is forced by these neocons in Washington to genuflect to the Israeli lobby, to all these lobbies here that don't want to have peace in the Middle East.
Well, I mean, I'm one of many conservatives who want an agreement with Iran, and we think an agreement with Iran should be struck based on what President Obama said when he ran for office. He said in 2008, Iran should not be enriching uranium. In 2012, Iran should shut down its entire nuclear program and comply with all UN resolutions. Under this program, Iran keeps its entire nuclear program. Okay. UN resolutions are dropped.
Okay, but
my view is an agreement is possible.
But Iran is a member of the NPT. It has had inspections from the IAEA, and it's been the most inspected country when it comes to this program than any other country in the history of these inspections here. It has the right to enrich. We have to remember that it signed a treaty where it has the right to enrich. Just because Barack Obama said a few years ago that it shouldn't be enriching uranium is neither here nor there. It has nothing to do with international law.
Well, I believe Iran has forfeited the right to peace.
Oh, really? Okay. It has forfeited its right. Okay. Other countries, we have Pakistan, we have India, we have Israel.
Wait,
have they forfeited anything? Go ahead, Fred. Go ahead.
Well, just quickly, I believe Iran has forfeited its right to peaceful nuclear technology by cheating on its nuclear treaty obligations. But concerning enrichment, even the Obama administration does not concede that Iran has a right to enrichment. I think it has in effect conceded this, but this is not something even Obama officials will say.
Okay.
No.
Go ahead, Brian.
The Obama administration and the United Nations, which just voted to accept this agreement, acknowledged that Iran does have the right to enrich uranium. Read the 159-page document, Fred. It's not that big of a deal to read it. It says that Iran has the right to a civilian nuclear. It has the right to a civilian nuclear energy program, and furthermore, that is their right. You are not the judge, jury, and executioner based on your opinions or anyone's opinions about Iran's legal rights. It's a country of 80 million people. It's got a high degree of education, a very, very important country in the Middle East. It's developing nuclear energy for peaceful purposes.
And a state sponsor of
terror.
Right
now, the whole world acknowledges that they have this right, except you and your neoconservative friends in Congress who are trying to torpedo a deal. And if you all succeed, if you torpedo the deal,
and many
Democrats
in Congress,
that it was the United States, and some Democrat neocons too, and all of them, and many of them perhaps. But if they succeed, the whole world will know that it's the United States that does not want a nuclear arms deal with Iran, not the Iranian government.
Okay, on that point, gentlemen, we've run out of time. We've run out of time. Many thanks to my guests in Washington and in Charlottesville, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules. I love you.